Hilchos Maachalos Asuros Perek Chamishi, the laws of forbidden foods, chapter 5. What's good about these chapters is that every one is like its own topic. We're all dealing with many types of forbidden foods, but each perek covers a separate sugya, separate topic. Today's topic is Eiver min hachai, limbs from a living animal. Yesterday we learned about the nevela, the treifa, dead animals, mortally wounded animals. Today we're kind of backing up. While the animal is fully alive, you can't take a limb out of it and eat it. Says the Rambam halacha aleph mipi hashmua lamdu. We learn from tradition. Shazeh shenemar b'Torah, that when the Torah says, and that's the top verse on the screen, lo yisoichal hanefesh im habasar, you shall not eat the soul with the meat. What does it mean? Don't eat the soul with the meat. Lesar eiver shenechtach min hachai. This verse is forbidding a limb that was cut off from a live animal. When it's cut off from a live animal, it still has the soul in it, in a way. And when you eat it, you're eating the soul with the meat. Not only is it a prohibition for Jews, concerning the living animal's limbs, Hashem said to Noach, way before the Torah was given, Ach, however, basar b'nafshay damay, the meat, while its soul is in its blood, lo yiseichelu, you shall not eat. Which means, don't eat from a living animal, essentially. It's one of the 7 mitzvahs of the Noahites. Not to eat Eiver min hachai. The Isur Eiver min hachai, noyheg b'vehema chaya v'oif. The laws, the prohibition of eating a limb from a living animal applies both to an animal, a beast, or a bird, b'tehorim avaloi b'tmeim, but only to kosher species, not to non-kosher species. Like yesterday, we saw when it came to the nevela, the carcasses, and the treifa, they only apply to kosher species because non-kosher species are inherently non-kosher. So no further prohibition can apply to the meat. Now, we have to define what does it mean limb. We're using the word aver. How do we define limb? Says the Rambam halacha beis, echad aver sheyesh bei basar v'gidim v'atzamis. Whether a limb that's in its full form, it has flesh and sinews and bones, kigen hayad v'haregel, like a hand or a foot, the echad aver she'ein bei etzem, or a limb that has no bone, kigen halashain v'habeitzim, the hatchol, the hakloyos, like the tongue, or the testicles, or the spleen, or the kidneys, the chelev, and fats, the chayetzim, and anything like that. They have no bone, but they still qualify as a limb. Ella, except that there's one difference between a fully formed limb and a limb with no bone. Shaha'ever she'ein by etzem, a limb that has no bone, bein shechasach kulei, bein shechasach miktasai, then whether you cut off the entire thing or only part of it, hareza asr mishum eiver min hachai. It becomes forbidden on account of being a limb from a living animal. Whereas the limb that has a bone, you're not held liable on account of a limb from a living animal unless it separates from the animal as it is created. Basar, v'gidim, v'atzamais, the flesh, the sinews, and the bones. But if all that came off, let's say from the foreleg of the animal, was just the flesh, not the full hand, just the meat of the hand, chayav alav, you are liable for a different reason. Mishum treifa, k'moshe b'yarnu. This is torn meat. Lo mishum eiver min hachai. Not because of a limb from a living animal, that's not a limb. If it's the tongue, you cut out half of the tongue, you still have a limb. But if you're dealing with a hand or the foreleg, it has to be the whole foreleg to hold you liable, not just the flesh. Halacha gimel ha'oichel me'eiver min hachai kezayis loika. What's the requisite amount? You have to eat an olive-sized portion from the limb that you took from the living animal, and then you get lashes. Even if you ate a complete limb. We had the other day the concept of a beria. You eat a complete creature, you eat a complete fly, even if it's smaller than an olive size, you get lashes. But over here, a full hand is not called a complete creature, such that if it's less than a kazayas, you get lashes. No, even if you eat a complete limb, im yesh by kazayas chayav, pachas mi kazayas potter. If it has an olive-sized portion, you're liable. Less than an olive-sized portion, you're not liable.
It's still prohibited though.
Huh? Yes. Potter always means it's still prohibited, but there's no punishment.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like on Shabbos.
You would think because there's no punishment, physical punishment, no lashes.
Yes.
You would think it's admissible.
You're off the hook, right? That's right. No, it's never. Just because you don't get a punishment doesn't mean it's not forbidden. It's forbidden. In general, we have the principle in Talmud that says potter aval asr. That's the way it's said. Exempt but forbidden.
Right.
The way to say permitted would be mutter. You would just say it's permitted. You wouldn't say you're exempt. Exempt means like we're exempt from punishment, but you still transgressed. Chasach min ha'ever kibriyasai, basar v'gidim v'atzamais. kezayis va'achaloi. You have a limb that came off as is, a full hand of the animal. Then you cut off an olive-sized portion of that piece, which has flesh, sinews, and bones, and you ate the whole olive size. Loike, you get lashes. Afal pisha ein by basar ella kol shehu. Even though there's only the smallest amount of meat. Usually, for the sinews and the bones themselves, you wouldn't be held liable. But here, because it's an olive size of the natural state of the limb, and you ate it, you're liable. Avolim hifrid ha'ever. Achar shetol shen min hachai. But if you were to detach the limb after it was detached from the live animal, the hifrid habasar min hagidim u'min ha'atzamai, separating the meat from the sinews, from the bones. So now you can't make a mixture again. You're not going to get lashes till you consume an olive-sized portion of just meat. And here the bones and the sinews are not going to combine to the olive-sized portion because you have changed the natural form. You separated the meat from the bones. So now we only zoom into the meat. What if you have again the foreleg and you divided it into many small bits and you ate it bit by bit? We look at the total that you consumed and we say, if you consume an olive-sized portion of flesh, of meat, you're liable. If not, you're exempt from punishment. If you did take a natural olive-sized portion, a combination of meat, flesh, sinews, and bones, and you ate it, even though it may have divided into smaller bits in your mouth before you swallowed it, the doctors recommend you should chew things multiple times. So technically, in your mouth, it's going to come into separate compartments. Chayav, you're still liable because you took it in as a complete natural olive-sized portion, and therefore, even if it's made up of meat, bones, and sinews, it's all going to combine to make you liable. Halacha hey, talash ever min hachai v'nitrefa b'netilase. This is an illustration of the principle that's called shnei isurin bayin ka'achas. Two prohibitions come as one. Usually, we just said before, one prohibition cannot take effect over and above another prohibition. But if both prohibitions come at once, then you're liable for both of them. This is a good case of it. You pull out a limb from a living animal such that it becomes mortally wounded when you take it out. So you've now done two things. V'achle, if you eat it, chayav shtayim. You're going to be liable on two counts. Mishum ever min hachai, or mishum treifa. For a limb from a living animal, and you've eaten from a mortally wounded animal. Shaharei shnei ha'isurin bayin ka'achas. Because the two prohibitions come as one. You cut off the foreleg here, you've made the animal into a treifa, and you've taken a limb off of a living animal. Similarly, if you pull out fats from a living animal, you insert your hand into the animal's system, and you pull out a piece of fat, and you eat it. Like geshtayim, here you're going to get two sets of lashes. Not because the two prohibitions come at once, for a different reason. Mishum ever min achayu mishum chelev. You're going to be held liable for a limb from a living animal and for eating forbidden fats. The commentaries explain this is an example of what's called the isur moisif, a prohibition that covers a wider scope of people. What does that mean? Chelev, forbidden fats, are only forbidden to Jews. So while the fat was sitting in the animal, it was only forbidden to Jewish people. The moment you pulled it out and now made it a limb from a living animal, now it's become prohibited to non-Jews as well. Since the scope of the prohibition is now expanded, so both prohibitions take effect. And therefore, if you eat it, you'll be held liable on two counts. What if the animal that you pulled the fats out of was also mortally wounded? So you got a third issue now. If you eat that fat, like yashalo, you should get 3 lashes. Now over here, it would seem that the mortally wounded issue doesn't have a wider scope than the fats. They're both prohibited only to Jews. So why, when the animal becomes mortally wounded, does the fat get a second prohibition? So the commentaries deal with it. They point to a piece of Talmud where we learn it from the verse. It actually doesn't go with the logical rule. But there's a special verse which teaches that treifa, mortally wounded, goes into effect over and above the regular prohibition of fat. So you have 2 prohibitions. Once you pull it off the animal, now it's a limb from a living animal, expanding the scope to non-Jews as well. So you now have three problems. Halacha vav basar hameduldol bebehema ve'ever hameduldol ba. If you have flesh or a limb hanging off an animal, disjoined. Im eina yachal lachazer v'lichyos, if there's no way for the flesh or the limb to repair and become part of the body once again and resume living, afal pishalei peidash ela achar shenishchata, even if it actually detached only after the animal was slaughtered, asur ve'ein leikin alav, it's forbidden on account of a limb from a living animal. Because since it could never recover, at the point that it's disjoined, it's already considered a limb from a living animal. You don't get lashes because it never detached. It was still attached, but it couldn't have lived. If the animal dies in this situation, then we are going to consider the limb as if it fell off while it was alive. And you're going to get lashes for eating a limb from a living animal. So it's an interesting distinction. If the animal is slaughtered, you get less punishment. If it's not slaughtered, just dies, you get a full punishment. That's all if the meat or the limb could never recover. But flesh or a limb that was kind of detached, somewhat detached, but it could recover. If the animal was slaughtered, it's totally permitted. It's not a limb from a living animal because it could have in its lifetime recovered. Halacha zayin. Shamat ever oimiachai oidachai. A person dislocated a limb, or crushed it, or ground it, but it remained attached to the animal. It's a little cruel. So you never actually detached it, just dislocated or crushed. Like the testicles, let's say, he would have crushed or dissevered them from their point of connection, but still attached to the animal. It's not forbidden biblically because it has some life in it left, as evidenced from the fact that it's not decaying. Nevertheless, it's forbidden to eat it. It's a custom that all Jews adopted from days of old, not to eat such limbs. Because it looks like it resembles a limb from a living animal. Okay, halacha ches. Etzem shanishbar. If a bone breaks on an animal. Now, there are certain bones that if they break, the whole animal becomes a treifa, mortally wounded, and it's forbidden to eat. We're talking about a bone that broke that doesn't cause the animal to become a treifa. It's a regular, just a fracture.
Could have broken a rib.
Yeah. Certain ones are actually treifa if it breaks certain ribs, but let's just call it, it broke a bone. Im haya habasar oy ha'oyer, if the animal's flesh or the animal's skin, chayfer roiv avyer shal etzem hanishbar, v'roiv hekef hashever, if the flesh or the skin was covering most of the thickness, the diameter of the broken bone, and most of the circumference of the fracture, in other words, it hasn't fully emerged from the animal, it's broken, but it's still covered. You see kids today, they break their hand, right? It's kind of, the bone is cracked, but it's still covered by the skin. Harei mutter. Such an animal is permitted. It's not called a limb from a living animal. Nothing exited the animal. But if the bone protrudes out of the skin or out of the flesh, that part of the limb becomes forbidden. And when you end up slaughtering the animal or bird, you must cut off from the point of the fracture where it stuck out of the animal, throw it away. The rest is permitted. Doesn't make the whole animal problematic. But that part that was sticking out is problematic. What if the bone was broken? The flesh was covering it, so technically it should be still part of the animal. But the flesh that was covering it was crushed or like decaying. Dead flesh which a doctor might remove on a human being, let's say. Or there was a bunch of flesh all over the broken bone, small pieces. If you added them all up, it combines to the majority of the diameter, but you need to combine all the little pieces. Or the flesh on it was full of holes. Or it was full of cracks. Or it was cut around like a ring. Or it was flattened, it was filed down. There's only a little peel's worth of flesh. It's covered by flesh, but covered by a tiny layer. Or it's covering the bone, but the actual flesh that was attached to the bone was decayed. The flesh that's covering is not touching the bone. It's over it, but it's not touching. B'chol elu, in all of these last 7-8 cases, moedin le'isur. We will rule, as a rabbi, we will rule that it's forbidden. We'll consider it to have exited the body, ad sheyisrape habasar, till the flesh or the meat surrounding it becomes fully healthy. If a person will eat from such a limb, we can't hold you accountable biblically, but the rabbis will give you rabbinic lashes. Halacha tes hamoishiyat yad lim'ei behema. A person sticks his hand into the intestine area of an animal, into the animal's womb, and cuts a piece of the spleen or the kidneys or something like that. He left the pieces in the womb and then slaughtered it. Those pieces are considered a limb from a living animal and they're forbidden, even though it's inside the stomach. For contrast, if a person would have cut a piece of the fetus in its womb without taking it out and then slaughtered the mother, that piece of the fetus or the limb would actually be permitted, since it never exited the mother. We're going to see in a moment that when a piece of a fetus exits the mother, even if it returns back, that piece becomes forbidden. Here, because you did the cutting off while it was inside the mother, and as the Talmud explains, a fetus is not as integral to the mother as its own body parts are, so therefore it's not considered to be a limb from a living animal. It's from itself, and so it's permitted.
It's not itself living, and it's not considered a limb of the mother.
Right. However, here's the case. Were the fetus to stick out its hand or foot, that limb which was placed out of the animal's body becomes forbidden forever. Whether you cut it before the animal was slaughtered or you cut it only afterwards, even if it retracted the limb to the womb of the mother, and then it was slaughtered. Or even if it was born fully later and it survived many years, that limb that emerged before the proper time of the full birth becomes forbidden on account of a treifa. What is the reason for this prohibition? We have a rule. Any flesh that emerged outside of its natural mechitza, its natural enclosure, becomes forbidden like flesh which detaches from a living animal. Shenemar, as it says, uvasar basada treifa. If meat became torn in a field, which means not only an actual pounced upon or an actual attack, but kevan sheyatza lemakam shehu leikesada. Once meat goes out to a place which is like a field for it, the fetus's place is in the mother's womb. It emerges out to its field. Nasa treifa kamesha b'yarnu. It becomes a treifa, as we explained, it becomes forbidden. There's some debate if this is even forbidden if the animal was born before the mother was slaughtered. Animal sticks out its hand, puts it back in, and then comes out fully before the mother is slaughtered. There, some say that it's actually permitted. It's only talking about a case where you slaughtered the mother, that leg that the fetus put out. Only if you slaughter the mother before the fetus is born and you take it out and it survives, that's when the leg is going to be forbidden.
Slaughter the mother before the fetus.
It put the leg out,
Right.
retracted it, then you slaughter the mother before the fetus is fully born. That's when the leg is forbidden.
Oh,
You understand?
So, okay, I misunderstood. So so the little calf sticks out its leg, which is pretty rare, and like it'd be like a big deal.
Sure.
No, but the thing is,
Then
during
puts
the
it back in.
process, part of
Right.
it might come out.
That's why some authorities say that's what Rambam means. That it's only talking about if the animal was slaughtered before the fetus was fully born. But the fetus was fully born,
It sticks out its leg, and then retracts it, and then it's born.
yes.
Can you the whole?
So now this is where the commentaries argue. Some say even the Rambam means it's permitted.
But some do believe that for the entire life. So once that calf grows
Right.
up, whatever.
Some say it remains forbidden, but some say it's permitted, and the Shulchan Aruch rules that it's permitted in that case. Yeah.
So kind of all of them?
Bottom line, yeah. Bottom line, it's permitted. Halacha Yud. Hoitzi mikza sa'ever v'nishar mikza bifnim. If the fetus sticks out part of a limb, not a full limb, part of it's out, part of it's in. Even if the minority is what remains inside, what's out is forbidden, what's in is permitted. If you had cut off that part that had emerged after it retracted it, and then it was slaughtered, again, you just make that distinction. Whatever came out is forbidden, the rest is permitted. If you didn't let the fetus retract it, you cut it off at the point of where it was emerging, while it was outside, whether you cut it before the mother slaughter or after, the place of the cut remains forbidden. That's the place that is open to the air, after you cut off that which was emerging, and therefore you must recut that point of where you cut, because that part is also forbidden. But after that, anything above that and inwards is permitted. Halacha Yud Aleph kol eiver ubar sheyatza, any limb of a fetus which emerged, which you slaughtered which you cut before slaughtering its mother while it's outside. That cut piece, of course, is a limb from a living animal, and you get lashes for it. Even if the fetus died before slaughtering the mother. But if it was cut after slaughtering the mother, the one who eats it is not going to get lashes even if it died. If the animal died and then you cut the piece that was emerging, then you will get lashes on account of a limb from a living animal. A limb was emerged from a fetus. The limb became forbidden, as we mentioned. Then the fetus is born, and the fetus happens to be a female. So now we have an interesting question. Exactly. Its milk cannot be drunk out of a doubt. Since the milk is produced from the sum total of the animal's limbs, and in the animal there's one limb that's forbidden. We should treat it like the milk of a treifa animal that was mixed with milk of a kosher animal, which you can't drink. So here also, there's two parts to the animal's body. One is forbidden, one is permitted, and they're both creating the milk. So we cannot drink it out of a rabbinic doubt. You slaughter a pregnant animal, and you find what's called a shlil, a fetus inside it. Bein chai, bein meis, whether it's permitted, whether it's alive or dead. That animal becomes permitted to eat even without ritual slaughter. This is called the ben pakua, a very interesting phenomenon that's being hotly debated today, especially in Australia.
Because they do it.
They do it.
So what's the scenario?
There's a fetus in a pregnant animal, that you slaughter the pregnant animal. The question is, does the slaughtering of the pregnant animal work for the fetus?
Right.
Because it's part of the mother.
All according to halakha.
You shechted the mother according to halacha. You open it up, you find the fetus in there. Whether it's alive or dead, the Rambam says it's permitted to be eaten. We'll soon see an exception in a minute. We'll see. Let's finish the whole case. First, he says that it's just permitted to eat. Just know that it's kosher. Even a placenta would be permitted to be eaten if it's in the mother's womb. If a placenta had partially emerged and you slaughtered the animal, if the placenta was attached to a fetus, the part that emerged is forbidden, the remaining part is permitted. If it wasn't attached to it, kula asura, the entire placenta is forbidden. Maybe the placenta which had partially emerged, the fetus that was attached to it, disintegrated. Whereas the fetus that was discovered in the womb, its placenta had disintegrated as well. So you can't for sure attach the two, therefore you forbid the entire first placenta. Needless to say, that if there's no fetus at all discovered in the womb, only a placenta, of course the entire placenta is forbidden. That's as far as the kosher status. The kosher status of the fetus is kosher. What about ritual slaughter? Matzah ba'ubar chai, says the Rambam, if you find a living fetus inside the animal, even though it's come to complete gestation, it's full term, it's been in there 9 months, it could live. No ritual slaughter is required. The slaughter of the mother purifies or permits the fetus. And if, however, it takes a few steps on the ground, then it does have to be slaughtered. So this last line here creates a huge debate. At what point do we consider this animal to have stepped on the ground to the point that it requires its own ritual slaughter. There's a story that goes around about the Rambam. It's not sure if it's true, but because the Rambam was hotly criticized in his day. People did not like the fact that he codified Jewish law. There was a lot of critics of him. So somebody came to visit him to check out how he observes Jewish law. And he did a whole bunch of things just to look like he was violating different laws to show that his critic didn't really understand what was going on. So one of the things he did is he had an animal prepared for the meal with no slaughtering. This guy couldn't believe it.
What do you mean?
In this case, right?
This case. He comes to a Jewish home, they're making him a steak from an animal that wasn't slaughtered. And in the end, it was this kind of animal. It was a fetus that was discovered in a pregnant mother, and it was allowed. The question is, at what point do you...
Does it separate?
yes,
whether you can eat
does
it?
it become
Ritually
requiring slaughtering or not? And then there was a guy, he's alive today. When I was in Australia in 2016, 2017, he came and gave a whole lecture to us because he has some kind of source in which if that baby has children, they also don't need to have ritual slaughter.
So according to that source, then it could take many steps and it's fine.
Well, that's the question. What is it called steps? If I keep it off the ground, if I keep it in a truck, does that work? He had a whole thing going, but most rabbis did not accept it. They came out against him and the whole thing. Halacha tezvav, kara asa behema or shachat behema treifa. If you tore open an animal, you didn't do proper slaughtering, or you slaughtered an animal which was treif, it was mortally wounded, umatzaba ben tisha chai, and now you find a fetus that's alive, 9 months old. Tzarich shchita lahatira. This fetus, of course, requires shchita because its mother wasn't shechted, or even if it was mortally wounded. Be'ein shchitas imay me'elas lai, its mother's slaughtering doesn't help it. Be'im loy gamru loy chadashav, if its gestation wasn't even complete, it wasn't even full term, afal pishu chai b'me'at treifa, even if it's alive, in the womb of a mortally wounded animal, hareza asur, the whole thing is forbidden. Because we consider it to be like a limb of its mother, who was also forbidden, and therefore the fetus is also forbidden. Completely. Kol ubar shahaitzi roishai vehechzirai. If a fetus stuck out its head and retracted it, before we're talking about limbs, the head, if it sticks out its head, it retracts it, and then you slaughter the mother, at this point, the mother slaughtering doesn't help. It's like it's already born and it requires its own shchita. Even if it pulled back its head. But once its head came out to the world, it assumes its own identity and has to be slaughtered in and of itself.